Thank you all for being here tonight. The numbers are in, and I have to say the results are rather unexpected.
The air was electric that night, filled with champagne bubbles, polite laughter, and the shimmer of ambition. Cameras flashed as the city's elite gathered beneath crystal chandeliers, celebrating what everyone called the start of a new empire. I stood there, wrapped in the illusion of perfection, a devoted wife in a designer gown, smiling beside a man whose dreams I had quietly built, whose success I had silently financed. Every detail had been planned to the second, every guest handpicked to witness his triumph. But beneath the applause and the lights, something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that hums under your skin, a quiet tremor before a storm. I noticed the way his eyes lingered too long in the crowd, the whispered laughter shared across the room that wasn't meant for me. In that moment, I realized this night, his grand moment, wasn't about what it seemed. It was about what I was about to discover, and the secret I had kept hidden far longer than he could ever imagine. The evening began like a dream painted in gold. The hall shimmered under the soft glow of chandeliers, the air rich with the scent of roses and expensive perfume. It was supposed to be a night of triumph, the culmination of years of effort, a celebration of the company my husband had built, or so everyone thought. The guests arrived in sleek cars, dressed in their finest, exchanging rehearsed compliments and laughter that barely touched their eyes. I moved among them gracefully, greeting investors, executives, and old friends of his, my smile effortless but hollow. Yet beneath the surface of all that glamour, a quiet unease started to creep in. It was something small at first, a fleeting expression on his face, a hesitation in his voice, a strange distance in his touch when he greeted me. He had always been confident at events like this, perfectly charming, the kind of man who could command attention without trying. But tonight, his energy felt different. His eyes darted too often toward the far end of the room, his words rushed, his laughter forced. I caught him checking his watch again and again, though the program was running smoothly. Every time I approached him, he seemed distracted, half present, as if his mind was already elsewhere. At first I tried to dismiss it. Nerves, perhaps, I told myself. This was, after all, one of the biggest nights of his career. But then I saw it, a subtle exchange across the crowd that made my breath catch. She was standing near the stage, elegant but understated, the kind of woman who didn't need to try too hard. When his eyes met hers, something unspoken passed between them, a silent recognition, a flicker too intimate for a man and a colleague. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. My heart sank, and my instincts sharpened in that instant. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the thundering pulse in my ears. I watched quietly, pretending to be engaged in conversation, yet my focus never left them. He looked away quickly, as though realizing he had been caught in a moment he shouldn't have allowed. Still, that single look told me more than words ever could. The rest of the evening moved in slow motion. Every laugh he shared with someone, every time he disappeared to take a call, every whisper between him and his assistant suddenly took on new meaning. My mind began to replay the weeks leading up to this night, the late meetings, the vague explanations, the phone calls he took in another room. All the small things I had ignored now formed a clear, damning pattern. Still, I didn't react. I smiled, I mingled. I played my role perfectly, because I knew one thing: emotions were a luxury I couldn't afford in public. People came up to congratulate him, praising his leadership and vision. I stood beside him as the cameras flashed, my hand lightly resting on his arm, feeling the coldness beneath his tailored suit. Every time he looked at me, his eyes darted away too fast, like a man avoiding his own reflection. The more he tried to appear normal, the more obvious it became that something was off. Then, as he stepped up to deliver his speech, the woman from earlier moved closer to the stage, her expression soft but intense. No one else seemed to notice, but to me, it was painfully clear. She wasn't just a colleague. She was the reason behind the distance, the silence, the unease that had followed us for weeks. I stood still, watching him speak, every word he said about integrity, loyalty, and shared success echoing with bitter irony. The audience applauded, completely unaware of the betrayal pulsing through the air like an invisible current. He thanked me publicly, his voice steady, his hand brushing mine in a gesture of affection that made my skin crawl. It was all a performance, and he was the lead actor in a play built on lies. But while he was busy putting on his show, I was quietly studying every detail, the nervous glance, the woman's subtle smile, the tension hidden beneath his confident tone. As the night went on, I found myself noticing more. The way she followed him with her eyes, the discreet text he checked under the table, the way he slipped away right after the speech under the excuse of a business call. The signs were no longer whispers, they were shouts in a crowded room. Still, I kept my composure. No one could see the storm brewing inside me, the realization that my world was quietly shifting. I had built everything around loyalty, trust, and the illusion of partnership, only to realize that somewhere along the way, he had rewritten the story without me. The unsettling signs were everywhere, scattered like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. But what neither of them knew was that I had secrets of my own, ones powerful enough to turn this night, his night, into something he would never forget. It happened in the most ironic way possible, right in the middle of his success, surrounded by applause and admiration. The moment was supposed to be the peak of his professional life, a celebration of all he had achieved, yet it became the stage for his greatest betrayal to reveal itself. After his speech, the guests began to mingle again, the champagne flowing freely, the band playing soft jazz that filled the room with an effortless elegance. I moved quietly through the crowd, offering polite smiles and small talk, though my mind was far from the surface of conversation. Something inside me urged me to look deeper, to follow the subtle tension that had been haunting the evening. He had excused himself moments earlier, saying he needed to meet with a potential investor in the private lounge area. It was a reasonable explanation, one that no one questioned, but my instincts told me something else. I waited a few minutes, pretending to check my phone before deciding to follow. The hallway leading to the lounge was dimly lit, the laughter and chatter from the ballroom fading with each step. My heels clicked softly against the marble, the sound almost too loud in the silence. When I reached the doorway, I heard it, soft laughter, hushed voices, the kind of intimacy that no professional meeting required. I froze for a moment, my hand resting against the polished wood of the door, my breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. Her voice was unmistakable, the same woman whose eyes had lingered on him all night. She said his name softly, almost tenderly, followed by a low chuckle that twisted my stomach. I pushed the door open slightly, just enough to see without being seen. There they were, standing far too close, his hand resting on her waist as he whispered something into her ear. Her fingers brushed against his tie, fixing it with a familiarity that no assistant or coworker should have. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The noise of the party, the music, the clinking glasses, it all disappeared, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, something innocent that could make it all make sense, but the way he looked at her shattered that hope instantly. It was a look I knew well, one that used to be reserved for me in our early days together, before ambition had consumed him and secrecy had replaced honesty. I felt the world tilt beneath me, a quiet ache spreading through my chest, not from surprise, but from confirmation of what I had already begun to suspect. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching the two of them laugh softly, their closeness wrapped in a kind of arrogance, the belief that no one would ever catch them. She said something about the success of the night, about how proud she was of him, and he smiled, leaning closer as if her praise meant more than the applause of an entire room. That was when it hit me, not just the betrayal, but the sheer disrespect of it. He had brought his affair into the very heart of his triumph, parading it in the same space where I stood as his loyal wife. I didn't move, I didn't cry or make a sound. Instead, I memorized every detail, the shade of her dress, the way his hand lingered on her back, the small secret smile that passed between them. My pain turned to a kind of cold clarity. I realized that this wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a pattern, a truth he had been living comfortably in while I was busy believing in him. After a while they separated, laughing quietly as if nothing was wrong, and he stepped out of the lounge first. I slipped away before he could see me, back into the main hall, where the noise and light swallowed my thoughts. I caught my reflection in one of the mirrors, poised, elegant, untouched by scandal. No one would have guessed what I had just seen. The mask I wore had become armor, and I needed it now more than ever. When he returned, his smile was effortless again, his demeanor composed, as if the past few minutes had never happened. He took my hand as though nothing was amiss, introducing me to a group of executives, his voice smooth and confident. I stood beside him, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine, and for the first time it didn't feel familiar. It felt foreign, hollow. The man who stood beside me was a stranger, performing the role of a devoted husband while his betrayal still echoed in my mind. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Every laugh, every gesture, every glance between them stood out in cruel clarity. No one else seemed to notice, but I could see it all now. The lingering touches, the stolen looks, the secret they thought they had hidden so well. And while he basked in the glow of his success, I stood quietly at his side, holding a truth that would one day destroy everything he had built. In the chaos of the celebration, I became a master of composure. My body moved on autopilot, smiling, nodding, clinking glasses, thanking guests, as if I hadn't just watched the foundation of my marriage collapse in the private lounge down the hall. Every instinct in me screamed to react, to confront him, to demand an explanation right there in front of everyone. But something stronger held me back. It wasn't fear, it was strategy. Years of watching him navigate business taught me that timing was everything. And this wasn't the time to break, it was the time to observe, to collect, to remember. I stood at his side as he made his rounds, introducing me to people I had already met a dozen times before. My lips curved into polite smiles while my mind was somewhere else entirely. Caught between disbelief and icy clarity, I could feel his hand occasionally rest on the small of my back, a gesture that once would have meant affection, but now only felt like an insult. He was performing, and I was his prop, an image of stability that helped reinforce his perfect life. If only the people around us knew how false that image was, how much rot sat beneath the polished surface. The woman, the one who had just been in his arms, moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. She greeted people, made small talk, and at one point even approached me. Her voice was smooth, her smile practiced, the kind that gave nothing away. But I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the smallest trace of guilt that passed like a shadow. She knew what I had seen, or at least suspected that I knew. I matched her calm with my own, greeting her warmly, thanking her for her work on the launch as though I didn't already know the truth. Our words were polite, meaningless, but underneath, there was a silent conversation happening. Hers, filled with uncertainty, mine with control. I watched my husband from a distance as he laughed with a group of investors. Every movement of his felt exaggerated, every word rehearsed. It was strange, seeing him so proud while I carried the knowledge of his betrayal like a weight pressed against my chest. Yet even in that pain, there was a strange sense of empowerment. He thought he was hiding something from me, but I was the one who now held the advantage, the truth. That thought steadied me, gave me the strength to keep the mask perfectly in place. The guests toasted his success, and I raised my glass along with them, my reflection glimmering in the crystal. A picture of grace. No one could have guessed that just hours ago, I had stumbled upon the kind of betrayal that could shatter a person. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. He had taken enough from me already, my trust, my peace, the illusion of partnership. What he wouldn't take was my dignity. I decided then that my silence would not be weakness. It would be my weapon. Every detail of that night burned itself into my memory. The way his laughter rose above the crowd. The way he avoided meeting my eyes for too long. The subtle tension that hung between him and her whenever they crossed paths. I caught them exchanging a glance once more during the dinner presentation, and I almost smiled to myself. He didn't realize that every move he made only confirmed how deeply his lies ran. He was too arrogant to think he could be caught, too self-assured to imagine I could be anything but oblivious. That arrogance would become his undoing. As the evening wore on, people began congratulating me too, praising me for being the woman behind the man, the silent force of support that had helped him rise so high. I thanked them graciously, even as their words stung. They saw me as the devoted wife, the loyal partner, when in truth I was standing in the ruins of everything that image represented. Still, I played my part perfectly. My voice never trembled, my smile never faltered. I had learned long ago that real power often came from what others didn't see, the thoughts you kept hidden, the truths you carried quietly. At one point he leaned close to me, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered how perfect everything had turned out. How proud he was to have me by his side. I turned to him, my expression soft, my eyes unreadable, and said the only thing I could: "I'm proud too." He smiled, unaware of the double meaning in my words. I wasn't proud of him, not anymore. I was proud of myself, for standing there, for not breaking, for realizing that I didn't need to react to prove my strength. As the night drew on, I slipped into the role he had written for me one last time. Perfectly poised, unshaken, invisible in my control. He had built this empire believing he was untouchable, that no one could ever challenge him. But I knew something he didn't, that his empire wasn't built by his brilliance alone. It was built on the foundation of my support, my resources, my silence. And now, that silence had turned into something far more dangerous: a plan. The room glittered with celebration, but inside me, everything felt muted, distant, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. Every movement I made was deliberate, every smile carefully timed, every word calculated. No one could see the storm raging beneath the surface. They saw elegance, composure, a wife basking in her husband's success, but behind my calm exterior, emotions clashed like waves: betrayal, disbelief, anger, and a strange kind of sorrow that settled deep in my bones. Yet I held it all in, because I knew one truth that night: losing control in public meant giving him power, and I refused to let him see me break. I watched him from across the room, surrounded by admirers, his laughter echoing through the hall. He looked so at ease, so proud of himself, as though nothing had happened behind that closed door. His eyes occasionally met mine, and he would offer a small smile, the kind he used when he wanted to reassure me everything was fine. It used to work once, that smile. Tonight, it only disgusted me. But I smiled back, flawless and calm, playing the part so perfectly that even he seemed convinced. I'd learned long ago that silence could be louder than words, and tonight, my silence spoke volumes. Inside, my heart ached with betrayal. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the depth of deception, the casualness of it, the way he could touch her and then step onto that stage minutes later to thank me for my loyalty. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Still, I stayed perfectly poised, because I knew this wasn't the moment to confront him. Not here, not like this. He loved control, and he thrived on appearances. Ruining that facade in front of his investors might have felt satisfying, but it would also give him what he wanted. A reason to paint me as emotional, unstable, overreacting. No. My revenge would come later, and it would be quiet, strategic, and absolute. As the night continued, I moved through conversations as though nothing had changed, my voice steady and my laughter timed to match the rhythm of others. But inside, I analyzed everything, every interaction between him and her, every secret glance, every moment he tried too hard to appear normal. The more I watched, the more detached I became. The pain began to shift into something sharper, colder, clarity. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that ballroom hours earlier. I had been naive, trusting, even proud of him. Now I saw him for what he truly was, a man who mistook kindness for weakness, who believed deception could last forever. I excused myself at one point, retreating to the balcony for air. The city stretched out below, glittering with lights, and I gripped the railing, steadying my breath. My reflection in the glass door behind me was calm, beautiful, composed. But my thoughts raced. I remembered all the times I had defended him, supported him, believed in him. I had built him up, given him resources, opened doors he never could have reached without me. And this was how he repaid me, by dragging our marriage into the shadows for a woman who offered him nothing but flattery. The injustice burned, but so did a realization. I had power he didn't even understand. He thought I was just his wife, a silent partner in his success. He had no idea what I truly was, what I truly possessed, or what I was capable of doing when pushed. I stayed on that balcony longer than I should have, letting the cool night air steady me. The anger began to crystallize into focus. I knew exactly what had to happen next when I returned inside. It was as though I had reset myself. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled me. It fueled me. My eyes met his across the room, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw an opponent. He smiled at me again, oblivious, and I felt the faintest trace of satisfaction, knowing I was already several steps ahead of him. Guests continued to approach us, praising his achievement, complimenting us as a power couple. The irony of it all was almost unbearable. I answered each one graciously, my voice smooth and even, never faltering. No one could see the divide between us, the fault line running silently through our perfect image. That was the beauty of control. It made chaos invisible. And while he basked in admiration, I began mentally preparing for what would come next. I knew him better than anyone. I knew his habits, his weaknesses, his pride. I also knew the one thing he would never suspect, that beneath the surface I wasn't just the supportive wife standing beside him, I was something far more dangerous. By the end of the night the exhaustion hit me, not physical but emotional. Pretending took energy, but it was necessary. I couldn't afford a single crack in the mask. The more people believed in our perfection, the easier it would be to dismantle it later, piece by piece, without anyone suspecting me. I let him take my hand as we posed for one last photo, his arm draped over my shoulders like a claim. Inside I felt nothing. The connection that once felt unbreakable was gone, replaced by the weight of secrets, his and mine. He thought he was the only one living a double life, but soon he would learn just how wrong he was. The irony of it all was almost poetic. While he stood there believing he had the upper hand, hiding his affair behind smiles and success, he had no idea the woman beside him carried a secret powerful enough to rewrite everything. I had spent years keeping that part of my life hidden, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I wanted to be seen for who I was, not what I came from. I didn't want his love, or anyone's, to be a performance built on my last name or the empire my family owned. So I buried the truth, choosing simplicity, living quietly, watching him build his company with pride. He believed he was the ambitious one, the self-made man pulling us toward success. He never realized that his entire dream, his launch, his investors, and even his reputation had been gently guided, influenced, and protected by me all along. When I first met him, he didn't know my background. I never mentioned the wealth, the power, the inheritance waiting in my name. I wanted to experience something real, something untainted by greed. For a while, I believed I had found that in him, a man driven by passion, not profit. But over time, ambition consumed him. He started measuring love in achievements, loyalty in usefulness. I watched him shift, slowly but surely, until the man I had fallen for disappeared beneath the hunger for recognition. Still, I said nothing. I supported him quietly, helped him network, provided connections through anonymous introductions. When he thought he was winning deals through charm and skill, he was really benefiting from doors I had already opened for him behind the scenes. I made sure his company stood tall because I believed in his potential. But that belief had limits, and the moment I discovered his betrayal, those limits vanished. He had always been curious about my past, but I was careful, offering vague answers about a modest upbringing and family overseas. He didn't question much at first. Later, when he began to notice the subtle signs, my education abroad, my comfort among the wealthy, the occasional familiarity with high-profile investors, I brushed them off with practiced ease. It never occurred to him that I could be more than what I appeared to be. He liked being the dominant one, the provider, the man who gave me the life he thought I wanted. I let him believe that, not out of submission, but because it was easier. People like him only respect what they think they control. That night, standing among his investors, watching him flaunt his success while his mistress floated in the background, something inside me shifted. I looked around the room and realized how many of those powerful faces owed favors not to him, but to me. The company's lead financier had been a family acquaintance who agreed to invest after one quiet conversation with me years ago. The venue they were standing in, owned by one of our holding companies, rented to him at a fraction of the cost. Even the very software that powered his latest product launch had come from a firm my family partially funded. Everything he believed he had earned through grit and genius had traces of my influence woven into it. And now, as he smiled and soaked in the applause, the irony felt almost cruel. He had betrayed the one person who could destroy him without raising her voice. My bloodline wasn't just wealthy. It was old money, the kind that didn't flash but controlled quietly, behind boardroom doors and closed deals. I had grown up around power that never needed to announce itself. I learned early how influence worked, how control was best exercised subtly, invisibly. When I married him, I had wanted freedom from that world, a life untouched by family expectations. Now that same world I had run from was the weapon I could use to bring him down. I watched him laugh with one of his partners, the same partner who had courted a joint venture with my family's conglomerate years ago. The man didn't even realize his empire was entangled with mine. My husband stood there, unaware that I could end his company with a single phone call. But I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't going to waste that kind of power on anger. I would use it with precision, the way my father once told me power should be used, strategically, silently, and only when the other side thinks they're untouchable. Later that evening, when we returned home, I looked around at the luxury that surrounded us, the art, the furniture, the car in the driveway, and realized how much of it he thought he had earned. The truth was that none of this would exist without me. My inheritance had quietly funded his early projects, disguised as loans from unnamed investors. He never questioned how easily those investors appeared, or how smoothly contracts were approved. I had wanted to help him, to see him thrive, but he had taken that generosity and twisted it into entitlement. He didn't just betray me as a wife, he betrayed the very foundation that had allowed him to rise. I walked past him that night, my expression serene, my mind already calculating. He didn't know that the woman he had underestimated was not just his wife but the silent architect of his empire. The billionaire heir he thought didn't exist was standing right beside him, and soon she would make sure he finally understood who truly held the power. The night after the launch, the house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down like a weight. He had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted from the celebration and the attention he had so shamelessly absorbed, while I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The images of him with her flickered behind my eyelids like an endless reel, his hand on her waist, that look in his eyes, the smugness of a man convinced his secrets were safe. I turned toward him in the darkness, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and realized that something inside me had shifted beyond repair. Love had turned to ash, and in its place grew a calm determination. Betrayal could destroy a weak woman, but I wasn't weak. He had built his world on my silence, and now I would use that same silence to take it apart. The next morning, I played my role flawlessly. I brewed coffee, greeted him with a soft good morning, even kissed his cheek before he left for the office. He didn't notice the change in my tone or the calculation behind my smile. That was his first mistake. His second was underestimating how dangerous a composed woman could be. While he went about his day pretending everything was fine, I began moving quietly through the house, gathering what I needed: documents, contracts, bank records, all the things he never thought I'd understand or care about. But I had always been paying attention, even when he thought I wasn't. Every deal, every transaction, every investor name, pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, revealed just how much of his empire depended on my unseen hand. I reached out to a few people that afternoon, not directly, but through subtle messages, people who owed my family favors, people who would understand without me needing to explain. Meetings were scheduled under the guise of casual lunches. Emails were exchanged, discreet and encrypted. I didn't need to announce what I was doing, I simply started pulling the right strings. By the time he returned home that evening, exhausted and full of himself, things had already begun to shift beneath his feet. Over the next week, I watched him with quiet detachment. He continued his routine, unaware that the ground beneath him was starting to crack. I didn't lash out, didn't accuse him, didn't give him the satisfaction of a scene. That would have been too easy, too expected. Instead, I smiled, cooked dinner, attended his meetings when needed, and slowly began to position myself where he least expected it: in control. I met with our lawyer under the pretense of updating our estate documents, but in truth, I was preparing something else entirely. Ownership transfers, board seat adjustments, dormant agreements that would come alive with a single signature, all quietly executed in my favor. The woman he betrayed me with worked for him, but she was reckless. I didn't have to dig far to find her weaknesses: financial inconsistencies, private messages, company policy violations. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. I didn't expose her immediately. I simply collected the evidence, building a quiet arsenal of truth. The moment I needed it, I would release it in a way that wouldn't just ruin her career. It would implicate him too. Through it all, I never once let my mask slip. I attended dinners, smiled at investors, and continued to play the devoted wife. He still believed he was in control, that I was blind to everything. But every time I looked at him, I saw a man digging his own grave with arrogance and deceit. He didn't realize that I had already set the terms of his downfall. One evening, as we attended a follow-up meeting with his board, I watched him boast about upcoming expansions, unaware that half the board members were now quietly siding with me. My family's influence had reached them long before he ever knew their names. They respected power, and I was power wrapped in patience. When he introduced me as his supportive wife, I almost laughed. He had no idea he was standing beside the person who would soon own everything he claimed as his when the time came. I didn't make a scene or deliver dramatic ultimatums. I simply withdrew what was mine: funding, shares, trust connections, and let the dominoes fall. Contracts unraveled, investors pulled out, suppliers renegotiated. Within weeks, his company began to struggle. I stayed silent through it all, watching him grow desperate, his confidence slipping. The woman he had risked everything for disappeared when the first signs of trouble appeared. Loyalty, it seemed, wasn't her strength. He came to me one night, exhausted, defeated, asking for advice, for help, for partnership. He had no idea that I was already 3 steps ahead, that the only reason I hadn't destroyed him completely was because I wanted him to see exactly what it felt like to lose everything he had taken for granted. I listened to his pleas, my expressions soft and sympathetic, and told him what he wanted to hear, that I'd take care of things. And I did. But not for him, for me. Days later, his company changed hands quietly. The ownership transfer papers bore my name, signed and sealed. When he finally realized what had happened, it was too late. The empire he built on lies now belonged to the woman he had betrayed. I didn't raise my voice, didn't demand revenge, didn't even confront him about his affair. I simply let him face the truth, that I had always been the power behind his success, and that by betraying me, he had signed away everything he thought was his. In the end, everything came full circle. The man who once believed he held all the power discovered that the very woman he betrayed had been the quiet architect of his success. His affair, his arrogance, his lies. All of it collapsed under the weight of a truth he never saw coming. I didn't need to scream or seek revenge through chaos. I simply reclaimed what was mine. The empire he flaunted was built on my foundation, and without me, it crumbled into dust. What began as heartbreak transformed into clarity, strength, and freedom. I walked away not as the broken wife he expected, but as the woman who finally remembered who she was. A billionaire heir, a strategist, and the one who didn't just survive betrayal but turned it into her greatest victory. Some losses, after all, are nothing but disguised awakenings.